All right, let's talk about the economy. I know it's what everybody's been waiting for. Sometimes I think I'm just amusing myself to the vacuum of the internet. Anyway, wealth inequality. It's a big thing. This is, I think, a fraught topic. And not because people don't recognize that it's an issue. Uh, we know it's an issue. There's no beating, beating around that bush. There's a lot of information out there about wealth inequality and the causes of it, uh, reasons, how we got here, all that kind of stuff. Go, discover, learn. But the long and short of it is that over the course of the past decades, centuries, whatever you will, the assets, or the resources, if you will, have gone from being spread out to some people, owned by the government, to being controlled and owned by fewer and fewer people. Or more and more have gone to a smaller percentage. So, and a very frequently cited thing is that, in the 80s and 70s or whatever, 25, okay, first of all, I'm making these numbers up. Give or take. But, 25% of the top 1% of wealth, most wealth was owned by the top 1%, and now that number is like 35. Okay, it doesn't actually matter. Nobody cares about the specifics. I mean, obviously people care, but most people don't care. The point is that a smaller number of people own more now than they did before. And more people owned more than they do now. And what that means in practical terms is that whereas 50 years ago, one person, man, right? Because 50 years ago, most of the working population were men, could have a job, like a normal job, not a higher education needed job, right? Not a college degree level job, like a normal working class job at the post office or the coal mine, or whatever, right? Truck driver, or whatever have you. And that one man could live his life and provide for his family. He could buy a house. He could support a wife and 2 to 3 children, right? And go on vacation once a year. Now, am I saying it was ideal? No, of course not, right? Shit was fucked up in the 80s. But in this way, that was possible. Then what happened was a lot of things happened. People love to blame Reagan. They love to blame Margaret Thatcher. It's not, obviously, like everything else, it's not so simple. A lot of things happened. But essentially, yada, 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 here we are now, and that same man working at the post office can't do any of that. He can't buy a house. He can't support a wife and 2 children and go on vacation, right? This, like, none of that is possible anymore. Not only is that not possible, but now that man's wife has a job too. And maybe she has 3 jobs, and maybe he has 3 jobs, and they still can't afford childcare, health care, and any education for their children. They can't afford healthy food. They can't afford electricity. And so this, let alone, right, vacations and buying a house, like, that's just completely out of scope. So this is what we mean, right? And meanwhile, we've got a trillionaire taking a chainsaw as a stunt. And so that's what we have is going on, right? Again, I'm not saying anything new. This is all well known. Now, where it starts to get forked in the road is on the solutions to this. Now, broadly speaking, the Republicans will say that we have to cut the welfare state. The welfare state is free healthcare for those very few people that get it. Social Security, SNAP benefits, all that kind of stuff. Supplemental programs that the government gives because people can't afford their lives anymore. So the Republicans are saying that there's this huge money drain, and the drain on the system is essentially poor people not working enough, not being motivated enough, whatever the negative things that they like to say. I don't feel like I need to repeat it. And also immigrants taking your jobs. Now there's so much wrong with these arguments, but suffice to say that they're not based in reality. There's no actual evidence that any of that is happening. Now, the liberals are also kind of divided, right, into a couple of camps. Some of them will say that we need to cut spending on unnecessary bureaucracy. We need to get rid of all of the bureaucracy and the red tape and the, hurdles that make it harder for the government to spend money. This is kind of that abundance doctrine, that there's plenty to go around. In order to have abundance, we have to sort of get out of our own way. I'm paraphrasing, as I want to do. And then, of course, there's the tax the rich. And the tax the rich is salient because, one, duh, right? It is stupid that people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk don't pay any income tax. Now, the reason they don't pay taxes is because we have an income tax system, right? That means that you get taxed on your income. That's the money that you earn. So it's your paycheck. They don't get a paycheck because they're so wealthy that they live off of their assets. Now, their assets are mostly companies, stocks, and ownership of companies. That's where the rich, that's their bread and butter. That's where they shine, and where most of their financial wealth comes from. It's in owning private companies and stocks. And then, of course, there's property, right, and other assets, art, property, islands, what have you. So that's where their money comes from, but we don't tax that. Why don't we tax that? That's the crux of this argument, right? It's that why don't we tax assets? we should be taxing wealth, property, stock portfolios. The way that we tax them is through something called capital gains. That means that when you sell the asset, you get taxed on the difference between what you bought it at and what you sold it at. So if you bought a house for $1 million and you sell it for $1.5 million, you get taxed on that $500,000. Again, broad strokes, paraphrasing here to make things simple. Also, I'm not a tax attorney, so take what you will. So this is the whole thing, right? Is that rich people don't get an income and they don't sell their shit, right? Why would they sell their shit? They just keep accumulating it. And so they don't get taxed on it. And so the whole tax the wealth is basically saying these people who are worth $1 trillion, but really $1 billion at this point, they should be paying taxes. They should be paying taxes to the extent that somebody who is making $60,000 a year is paying taxes, right? And somebody who is making $100,000 a year is paying taxes. So that's kind of what they're saying, is that there should be a way that these people pay tax. Fair enough, not crazy. Now, the pushback on that comes in a couple of forms, right? Number one, it's the logistics and the feasibility of it, right? There's a lot of pushback that says it's hard to do that because it's hard to value their assets. Like, these people don't, because we don't tax them, they don't have to declare their assets. They don't have to say, I have, or they don't have to tell the IRS every year and have a record saying that I have these 5 properties that are worth this amount of money, and I have this amount of stock portfolio that are worth this amount of money, right? And so they're like, it's all of their wealth is a little bit like opaque, right? Because nobody is telling us like what they own and where they own it and how much they own. Now, this argument, I don't want to say it's stupid, but to me, it seems silly. Because in this day and age, there are so many records and there are so many things out there to keep track of this stuff that it's unrealistic to say that there's no way that we're going to be able to find all of their money. Like, are they going to hide it and try and skew it? Like yes, of course. But not everybody. And realistically, it's like we have property records. If you buy a house, there's a record of that. So that's a pretty easy thing to get, right? If you buy stocks, there is a record of that. Banks, financial advisors, like, these people don't live in in an off-the-grid system. It's gridded. Everything is gridded. So to say that it's going to be hard to track down this information, I think is a cop-out. I don't think it's hard, and I think especially with AI technology, like boom, 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 everything's going to be connected. All of these disparate databases are pretty soon, if not they're already, going to coalesce, right? And that information is going to become easier and easier and more available to find. And there's absolutely no reason why the government can't access that information, right? Why the government can't access the property records and the stock portfolios. So that's one reason debunked. The main thing that people argue about, the main point is that if you tax the billionaires will leave. And this is the flight, right? The white flight. We don't want them leaving. And this is also what I also think is kind of a cop-out. Because there's so many ways of getting around that, right? Number one, you tax where the assets live, right? So if a person owns a property in New York, even if the person doesn't live in New York, you tax the property in New York, right? If a company, same with the company, right? If the customers are in Colorado, you tax that. It's like there are ways of getting around this. You can also, as long as you're a citizen of a country, you can be taxed. Like in the US, if you go to Europe for a year, you're taxed on that money, right? Don't quote me on that, but I think so. And even if you're not, like, the US can do that. You can tax a citizen. And realistically, do you honestly think that all of the American billionaires are going, because they now have to pay, and again, we're not saying they have to go from being a billionaire to a mere millionaire. We're saying that they should give a proportion of their income, which is like 1% every year, right? So that argument that like they're all going to then renounce their US citizenship because they don't want to give away 0.01% of their wealth or whatever it is, or even 1% of their wealth, is unrealistic. And quite frankly, if they do and they want to move and operate all of their business and all of their properties and all of their companies outside of the US, then go right ahead. Great. Go and help a third world country and go give them your billions of dollars, or keep it to yourself and live there by yourself. It's just, again, it's not realistic. I just think it's something that people say because they understand that the actual hurdle to taxing the rich is the rich don't want to be taxed. Like, that's the truth, right? And they will do whatever they can to elect politicians, or to campaign for politicians to be elected who will not tax them. And that's see my democracy video. Why I did that one first. Haha. Inside joke. So that's the thing, right? Is that they just don't want to be taxed. They don't want to give their money away. They think that they deserve this money because they earned it. Now, the hilarity of it is that, of course, they didn't earn it by themselves. Not a single one of these billionaires would be billionaires without government assistance, right? And without other human beings. Like, other human beings and like other things had to happen in order to give you this life. So this weird thing that they feel like they are entitled to all of it is the real crux of the shame. What makes you think that you did this alone? Like, what makes you think that you operated in some vacuum of a situation where there weren't hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other human beings adding into this very, very particular situation that allowed you to become a billionaire? Take care of other people. That's all I'm saying. So, anyway, so that's the tax the rich. Now that's the, Gary's economics wing of of the party. And if you don't know who he is, again, Google it. This is a YouTube person whose sort of YouTube format I'm mimicking here, in hopes that a message can be spread and we can get some political action and motivation here. Now, beyond the tax the wealthy and wealth inequality is the other aspect of our economy, right? And that's the economy that's based off of extraction. And this comes into it all because once we tax the rich, not if, when we tax the rich, what do we do? Right? What do we do with all this extra money that we have? And that's the other aspect of it, right? Is that, like, let's say it passes. Let's say we do get more money, right? And let's say we use that money to prop up a system that doesn't work. And what's going to happen, right? We're just going to be back where we are now. And so the other switch that needs to happen is this economic model of extraction and unlimited growth. And this is something that we see coming up more and more, but slowly and slowly. Particularly as it obviously relates to environment and climate. So there's this thing called living system science, right? And this is the idea that the earth and our body and everything is a living system, right? And in a living system, things grow. You've got your seed that grows and it, puts out more seeds. And then it dries up and it decays and it composts and it uses that to feed the new seeds, right? And it's this cycle of basically growth, decay, compost, rebirth, regeneration, right? It's a regenerative cycle. And this is how Mother and nature work. This is how we work, our bodies work, right? And when you apply that concept to things like politics and economics, you get this dynamic system, right? You get a dynamic system where you acknowledge and accept that there's a life cycle to certain things and that there are moments of growth and there are moments of decay and compost to free up that energy into something else, right? So that something else can be reborn. The market might call this boom and bust, but that's not really the same thing, right? Because while the market says there are boom and bust cycles, it also sort of operates and implies that there's this constant uphill. And that's the thing, is that the economy has been operating on this unlimited growth, right? Where you just want to keep growing. Sorry, I guess for you. Where there's this understanding that there will just be growth upon growth upon growth, right? The GDP just has to keep getting bigger. Companies, unlimited growth. Wealth, unlimited growth. And so what ends up happening is that you have these companies and you have this wealth and you have this growth, but it doesn't allow for any new growth, right? It doesn't allow for any new companies. It doesn't allow for any innovation. It doesn't allow for anything else to begin. And so what happens when you don't have new growth? You have stagnation, right? And that's where that sort of like poor lower middle, lower class is happening, is that we have stagnation, right? Where we can't grow or evolve or expand because we are barely surviving. While their unlimited growth is just continuing. So what does this mean for the economy? Like, how do we get into a sort of more regenerative, less extractive mindset in terms of the economy? Well, fortunately, there are economists who are giving us that. I think the best one is Kate Raworth, a name I remembered, Donut Economics. She does a really great job of illustrating and talking about, where we want to live. It's like in the donut. And just this idea of regenerative economics, and how the GDP marker is also, at this point, kind of a red, is it a red herring? Is that what red herring means? I don't know, false profit, like the false profit idea more. Because like what does GDP really stand for, right? It's like what we're producing, but when the wealthy class owns all of that production, it's really just what they're producing, right? So the GDP is just a reflection of the wealth that's being created, but it's not a reflection of what's actually happening in the economy, because none of that is circulating, right? I mean, this is the other aspect about the wealth and wealth inequality, which I forgot about, is that in normal, healthy economy, right, it's, again, there's a circulation. It's a circulation and money flows from, a person gets it and they use it to buy themselves things and, and that goes, and then that company gets to hire people, and that income goes to the person. You got the idea. But what's happening is that flow is now kind of skewed because the rich have consolidated the assets, right? They've consolidated ownership of everything. This is another sort of like, the Gary economics viewpoint. I say him because he's kind of like the mouthpiece for it. But the economist behind him is like Thomas Piketty, if you've heard or not, is sort of, he's kind of the big guy. He's a French economist who really like kind of took off with wealth inequality and distribution. And then this other, Gabriel Zuckman. So those are the economists that are sort of like behind provide the theory behind Gary's points. And what they basically illustrate is that whereas 50 years ago, or 80 years ago after World War II, the government owned a whole bunch of stuff, right? They owned land, they owned companies, they owned hospitals, they owned production and assets. They owned assets. And slowly, over the course of whatever it's now been, 80 years, the government has borrowed money and sold assets, right? Because they keep needing to fund the things that they have chosen to fund, right? Essentially a military. Other things too. But in order to fund all the things that they wanted to fund, they have sold off their assets to rich people, and they have borrowed money from other countries. So now the US is kind of broke. This is where our debt comes in, right? And this is that camp's viewpoint, right? Is that the only way to make money is to tax the rich, right? Because the government is broke, and the way that the government otherwise would make money is through, yeah, they don't have anything more to sell. They can't really borrow anymore. That's just more debt crises. And so they have to tax the rich in order to get money, right? You can't really tax somebody to get money. Because what's happening is that when the rich get money, so as opposed to it being before this, like, nice little loop of like income, taxing the government spending money on the public and giving the services, now that it's kind of like splintered off, and now the rich people basically are, the money is going from people to rich people, right? We pay our rent, that goes to landlords or investment companies, right? Big management companies. We pay our utilities, our electricity, our phone, our internet, right? We buy our food. It's, again, owned by large companies. Healthcare, so all of this stuff that we used to spend on the economy or the government is now just kind of going into the rich people, right? And because they have all the assets, because they have all of the buildings and the property and the companies and the corporations and the stocks and the hospitals. And so they own everything. So because they own everything, every single thing that we buy goes to them, right? And now, so then what happens, right? So then they have it, right? And the idea is that, well, sure, and this was the Republicans' idea, right? Is that, like, yeah, like, the rich people will get the money, but then what are they going to do with that money? They're going to give it back into the economy, right? They are going to hire people, and so they're going to give you jobs, right? And they're going to give you income, and they're going to give you jobs through hiring people. And they're going to buy, the food from the farmers. And so they're going to give the farmers money because the rich people will be buying food for their restaurants and their companies from the farmers. And so they're going to be giving the farmers money, right? And then they're going to be giving the government in taxes. And so the government will be giving, this is a trickle down, right? Is that the rich will, yeah, they'll get your money, but then they're going to give it all back, right? Surprise! That didn't happen. The rich people got all the things and they get all your money, but what do rich people do when they get more money? They're already rich. They don't need to buy more things. They already have all the things. So they hold their money, they keep it, and they buy assets. That's what they use with their money. They either keep their money in cash and they live off the interest, from in banks owned by, and then again, the banks owned by rich people, or they buy more property and more stock and more investments and more assets. And that's basically it. So they continue holding all of the assets and all of the stuff, and they don't actually send that money back into circulation in the economy. They just keep it in their own circulation, right, within themselves. And this is sort of where we're at and what's happening, right? And this is why Gary says is that in order to take the money and put it back into circulation, you have to tax, right? The only way to funnel that money back into this circulation is through taxing the government. It's through taxing the wealthy, right? Is to take that money back, put it back into circulation, and so that then the government can use it to give people health care and child care and, food and utilities and shelter and stuff like that. And it's not wrong, right? He's right. Like, yes, that we do need that, right? Absolutely. The step beyond that, as I said, was what do you do once you've actually taxed the wealthy. And that's the political aspect of it, right? He's got the economics down. The political aspect of it is, where does that go? Where do those resources go? Is that so if we tax the rich, right, and we get this money and then we put them in for like healthcare subsidies, like that's not actually going to fix the system. That's not actually going to help people get healthcare. They still are going to have to pay $700 a month for healthcare, even though they're not making the money, right? So that aspect of it is that the conversation that does need to switch is that is in the using the money to buy and build public services. And this is the part that scares people a lot, because when they hear that, they hear communism. And that's not the same, right? And it's like, there's been this Red Scare, Soviet big bad villain, since the end of World War II, right? But there's a difference between the Soviet Union and seizing, people's property or what. Honestly, I don't care enough to talk about it or to go into it. There's so much information out there if you do care. The point is that there's between that and building public infrastructure. Public infrastructure are like roads, but I would argue actually what we need are trains. Public transportation, high-speed trains, obviously. Housing, hospitals are a huge one. Schools, like all of these things. I mean, again, farms, food, grocery store, utility companies, AI companies, they're all of these things that people need to have a life that they feel good about. And they're basic needs, it is like food, shelter, health, community, family, right? Loved ones. And now people can argue about what the role of government is, right? And obviously that's a whole other thing. But at its core, it should be taking care of the people. And taking care of the people by providing them with services that everybody can use. Like hospitals and schools and parks and libraries and community centers and piazzas and, all of these other things that allow people to live in community with each other. That's where the government funding should be going, right? That's the political part about this. So how we get there is obviously like the economic part about this. And as I said, we got there down in economics. The other, I think, elephant in the room is the fact that we're a country that literally prints money. So while there's all this talk about there's no money for this and there's no money for that and how are we going to pay for this and we can never pay for childcare, it's like the point is that that's the wrong conversation, right? We have the money. Whether we tax rich people or not, quite frankly, we have the money. We can print the money. We can make the money, and if we wanted to, we could make the money. Now, obviously, that leads to inflation, and, that's where the taxing comes in, but blah, 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 whatever. That's too in the weeds. We don't need to go there yet. The point is that the money, the existence of the money isn't the actual issue, right? The issue is where we're putting that money, and it's kind of like when somebody was like, "Ugh, I'm so sorry, I had just had no time to do that." It's like, well, you did have time to do that, whatever that is, whether it's go to the post office or call your mom, just no time to do that. And it's like, no, you did have the time to do that. You just chose to do something else with your time, which fair enough, right? It's your time. You do you. But don't tell me that that the time didn't exist. It did exist. You just made a choice to do something else with that time. And that's my point here at the end of all of this, is that let's stop having the argument that the money doesn't exist, because it does exist, right? This is the richest country in the history of the world by some estimates. We make money. So the money exists, right? It's not about where is it going to come from. Although again, I'm not saying that that's not fair and valid. Like obviously, like it is fair and valid, right? It's not the crux. It's the crux of it is, what do we do with the money? What do we do with our energy? What do we do with our time? Those are choices. Those are choices that we make as an individual, and those are choices that our government can make. And so it's time to make different choices and to start asking of the people who represent us to start making different choices.